Joining me now is Michael Cohen's attorney, Danya Perry, who you just heard him talking about. She was sitting next to him in that exclusive interview on Thursday as well. Danya, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon. So I just wanted to start. I just played some of Trump's not so veiled attacks on Michael Cohen. He literally says, I'm not allowed to use his name because of the gag order. Is there any action? Are you watching this closely? Are you prepared to take any action in response if he does keep coming after your client?
We have taken action at every turn. I think a lot of people forget, because Michael can tend to have a dramatic persona, what he's actually been through, the trauma that he's actually been through. So I was there with him when Michael was thrown into solitary confinement in violation of his constitutional rights, and we got him out of that. I was there with him when Trump filed a $500 million lawsuit against Michael after he testified in the grand jury in this criminal case. And so, I heard your opening segment with Andrew, with Neil. It was chilling, because you're talking about, rightly, about violations of norms and to the rule of law and dangers to institutions and process, but also to witnesses. So as much as Michael is feeling relieved that the trial is over and gratified by the jury's verdict, he also is feeling fearful, and properly so, given the continued attacks, even under the gag order. And so I think he is prepared for that. One can never be truly prepared. He's certainly concerned. And we're going to do whatever we can, as we have in the past. But he's certainly concerned that if Trump is reelected, that nothing that I can do or any lawyer can do is really going to be able to help him avoid threats to his safety and to his liberty.
To that point, there have been a range of reports from NBC and others that a number of people involved in this, including jurors and others, have been doxxed, have been threatened. Are you concerned about your safety? Is Michael concerned about his safety? Right now.
Michael has certainly been concerned, and again, fairly so. There have been constant threats of violence and also just constant recrimination, of course. I've been on the receiving end of some of that, too, mostly just vile, misogynistic kind of feed. I'm not, so I think that's just exactly what one would expect. Admittedly, I was a little taken aback by it, but I think it's something he's lived with for 6 years now, and it's only increased with this verdict, and I think he expects that it will continue to increase and to amplify.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the tone, and Michael spoke about this in the clip we played there before you came on. He talked about how you and your team prepared him to testify, not to quibble, how he should admit to his own faults. How important do you think his tone and humility was for the jury, of Trump's peers, jury of everyday citizens making decision about the case?
I think it was critical. Look, as Michael said in the MSNBC segment, it's hard, and it's certainly counter to his kind of large personality, but it's important in terms of creating a connection with the jury, and I think also with the larger public. In some ways, he has gotten the short end of the stick every single time for 6 years. He was the only person held accountable for a long time, famously. He also was charged for things. I know he said this, and I told him not to quibble with this. In his testimony, certainly he was prosecuted for things that almost nobody is, sometimes as an add-on to other charges, which is what happened in this case. But rarely is anyone prosecuted for the kind of tax evasion that he committed. It would have been treated as a civil case. Having said that, he did take responsibility for it. And it's been my position all along that he should just move ahead, move forward. And he listened to me, at least during his testimony, and I saw that resonate with the jury. I saw them looking at him and nodding their heads and bonding with him in a way. So, it makes sense that that's kind of what people want to hear. People don't want to hear, yes, I said I did it, but let's argue on the margins of it. So I was glad that he moved on, that he finally and fully accepted responsibility, and it was gratifying for him and vindicating that several judges now and a jury of Mr. Trump's peers and his own peers believed it.
No question, people credit those of us who've interviewed him. Many of us have that his tone was very different, and it sounds like you were a big advisor in that, a key one. So your client is, he talked about in that clip as well, he served time in connection with the same scheme. He's been saying he doesn't believe Trump will serve in prison, time in prison. I want to play a part of his conversation that took place earlier this week and just get your thoughts on the other end.
I'm afraid of him going to jail.
Wow.
And not for him, not for his safety. That's on him. He's got Secret Service protection. I'm more concerned for you and for all of us and our families than for the American people, because this clown had 4 years of being debriefed on national security issues. My concern is, in a prison situation, he's willing to give away these secrets, as I always say, for a bag of tuna or a book of stamps. And he will do it because he doesn't care. If America turns against him, he'd rather see America burned to the ground. And that's who Donald Trump is, plain and simple.
So this was just kind of a different take than I've heard others make in terms of the risks here. I mean, and I guess the question I have for you is, the judge makes this decision about prison time, lots of factors here. Do you think he'll take national security concerns, what Michael's referring to, into account as he's considering the sentence? And if you had to guess, what do you think the sentence will look like?
I think perhaps that concern, in my own view, is it's a little overblown, because I don't see any world in which Trump is serving in Gen Pop, general population. Yeah. He certainly, if at all, he serves any prison time, he will be with his detail and he will be segregated. But look, the judge has a range of options available to him, from probation to community service, which I think would be interesting, to home confinement, to prison. I have looked at hundreds of like sentences. We did a white paper with some co-authors for the Brookings Institution, and people do get jail terms for this type of crime. And even people who plead guilty, right? So who accept responsibility, as this defendant has not. So certainly that's on the menu of options that the judge has. But I think, just given the logistics and the practical issues that would come along with that, it's just a personal view. I think that would be hard to fathom the judge doing that. And certainly there'll be appeals and delays along the way. And it's really hard to imagine this happening during a second term if that happens.
Tanya Perry, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon. I always enjoy talking to you and hearing your insights. I appreciate it. Former FBI Director James Comey joins me now, and he's written a brand new book, Westport, a crime thriller set in Connecticut. I'm from Connecticut, so, I don't know, you want to make people think there's all this crime happening there, but that's okay. Congratulations on the book. So I just wanted to start with, of course, the news this week. And before the verdict, you had said it was highly likely to result in a conviction. That's obviously what happened. A year ago, you made this prediction about Trump wearing an ankle bracelet. Do you think he's going to be wearing an ankle bracelet or be in jail after the sentencing?
I don't know. Seems unlikely, but I've never seen a defendant beg for it more by attacking the judge, attacking the jury, attacking the witnesses. One of the key things in assessing what sentence is appropriate, a judge looks at, so are you sorry for what you did? Are you respecting the system? This defendant is running the other way.
So a lot of people have suggested that there are a range of factors that would make it difficult to put the system has not been tested in this way. Do you agree with that it would be difficult or nearly impossible for the law enforcement institutions to put him in actual jail?
No, they would just put him in a double wide somewhere out near the fence, out in the grass. And he would eat there, he'd shower there, he'd exercise there, he'd be away, as Tanya Perry said, from general population, but it's obviously doable.
So your name was brought up in David Pecker's testimony, which was, of course, the first person who testified, and it turned out to be quite an important part of the trial that we watched over the last 6 weeks. He described a January 2017 meeting that you attended, and Pecker testified that at that meeting, Trump said, quote, he, Pecker, probably knows more than anybody else in the room. Earlier this week, you said you didn't want to comment on a witness testimony, of course, before a jury rendered a verdict. They've rendered a verdict. sounded like you also suggested his account may have been different from your recollection. So what is different? What was different from how you recollected that meeting?
Yeah, it seems like an honest misrecollection on his part. I was never in a meeting with Mr. Pecker. Listening to his testimony, I think he may have passed me in the hallway. So in his memory, I'm a giraffe, so I loomed large literally and figuratively, but I was never in a meeting like that. I wrote in a memo every conversation I had during that visit to Trump Tower that day, and it didn't include.
So you were never in a meeting with David Pecker? Did you at all, or just not that meeting?
No, never.
Never in a meeting?
Never been in the man's presence.
Well, that is a difference. I wanted to talk to you about the other three cases because, there are, as I noted in my opening here, three other cases pending, including 2 federal cases that are indefinitely on hold. I want to play something you said to me last June about the timing, and we'll talk about it on the other side.
I can't imagine a circumstance where the Department of Justice wouldn't, if they're going to charge him, wouldn't have done it so far in advance that we'd have a resolution before he took office.
So we're a year later, and we're waiting for the immunity ruling of the Supreme Court. First of all, do you think they could still get that case, get the January 6th case done if the Supreme Court rules in the next couple of weeks? Do you think they could still get it done before November?
Seems unlikely. With that, either case will be done before. And I didn't mean Trump taking office. God forbid. I meant before the election, where I'm optimistic he will lose. But I don't think that either case on the federal side will be resolved by then.
Let me ask you about the attacks used, because there are attacks on Judge Merchan, on Alvin Bragg, even posts of jurors. You've obviously said, it seems like you've said, that this could weigh in on the sentencing. But I want to ask you more about the impact and the danger of that, and how concerned you are about a repeat of the type of violence that we saw on January 6th.
I'm very concerned about attacks on the individual participants in the justice system. It's the reason we created the Federal Witness Security Program, to protect witnesses from mob threats like this. We have anonymous juries to try and protect them from mob threats. I never thought the mob threats would be coming out of the mouth of the Republican candidate for president. So I'm very concerned about that, concerned about wingnuts who are in MAGA world acting on that rhetoric to take steps to harm people. I'm not concerned, believe it or not, about large-scale violence. I think a deterrence message was sent, still being sent by the Department of Justice, that has scared the crap out of the would-be Capitol sackers, the would-be marchers. I think it's the reason you see almost no one at any of his legal appearances. So I'm less concerned about that. I remain very concerned about the individual threats and attacks.
I was at the courthouse on Tuesday, and it was a very small crowd. Let's hope that continues to be the case. So let me ask you about your book. I mean, truth can be stranger than fiction lately, I think it's fair to say. But this is your second book. It's called Westport. Tell us about your inspiration for this book, and what did you draw from your own experiences as people who are preparing to read it or buy it out there?
Well, it's a murder whodunit that is set in a different one than the first case, first book was in a mob case in Manhattan. This is in a financial manager, a big hedge fund in Connecticut. I happen to work at one. It's not a secret history of them, but it gave me enough knowledge to bring my characters to a very different world and tell a story that I think people will find addictive, a pretty good summer read for them.
And has this become cathartic for you, writing of these fiction books? This is not going to be your last one, it sounds like. It's your second one. Is it more cathartic than working in the FBI?
It's more fun than working in the FBI. You don't have to testify in front of Congress, for example. But I find it much more fun, harder than I expected, but much more fun than I expected, because I can take people and show them places I've known well through fiction with much more freedom than I ever imagined.
Director Comey, thank you so much for joining me on set this afternoon. Appreciate you spending the time. Neil Katyal is the former acting U.S. Solicitor General, and Andrew Weissman is former General Counsel at the FBI. There's a lot to dig into about what just happened last week and what's ahead, and we're going to do that. But, Neil, I mean, the message from many of Trump's supporters in the last few days seems to be focused on attacking the system, the judge, the jury, the participants in the process. I mean, you've worked in the judicial system and law enforcement and the system. What are the dangers to all of the people who are participating in the legal system if Trump's base simply does not believe, and the dangers to our country, really, if Trump's base simply does not believe in the outcomes of the legal system?
Yeah, I mean, this is Trump's MO every single time, which is burn the system down if it attacks him in any way. It's not the way I think any responsible former government official should behave. I think the system is more important than any individual person, but he never cares about that. Like now he's telling his supporters it's not a crime and this and that. Well, tell that to Michael Cohen, who after all went to jail for it and had all of the Trump supporters, applauding that back then. It's the same underlying thing. And look, if the system were rigged, Jen, like we'd be looking at 4 final convictions of Donald Trump in 4 different jurisdictions today, not the messy patchwork of partially litigated cases we have today. And just to get back to your question, like the threat is if he continues this rhetoric, there's going to be harm to potentially jurors, to potentially judges, law enforcement officers, and the like. It reminds me of back when in Georgia, a Republican election official said, Trump, cut out your rhetoric after 2020. Someone's about to get hurt. And of course, that happened so painfully for all of us to see on January 6th.
Yeah, Andrew, and you and I have talked about this, just to kind of build on what Neil was saying. We don't know what the impact of all this rhetoric is. It is people watching it and listening to it and thinking that it is a license to do something, to do others harm. An aspect of this are like a redux of 2020 to me, or I hear it that way. Talk to me about kind of your concerns here and what you hear when you hear these attacks on the judge, the jurists, others who are participating in the process.
What I would ask people to do is to actually look past the adjectives and adverbs and rhetoric and focus on facts. That is what happens in a courtroom. I'm less concerned about Donald Trump and what a defendant says. Donald Trump is a defendant who has been convicted, and like most defendants who have been convicted, they say the process was unfair and they disagree with it. That's what defendants do. He happens to unfortunately also be the candidate for the Republican Party. But the real issue is the one, Jen, that you focused on, which is the enablers, the idea that Susan Collins is denigrating the system. What I would say is look at the facts. David Pecker, Hope Hicks, Jeff McConney, people aligned with and supportive of Donald Trump took the stand, and they were not accused of lying. They were never cross-examined to say they are not telling the truth, and they set out the damaging evidence that the jury found guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. So go to the actual evidence as opposed to just putting on a label, because facts matter. If facts do not matter, this country is lost. There is no basis to have the rule of law and to have any system that protects us from authoritarianism. And there is a written transcript that everyone can go to show what happened. It is, you do not have to take anyone's word for it. It is in black and white.
That's so true, and people can empower themselves to do exactly that, and they should if they have questions. Neil, I just talked about this, but there was something that the Republican Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, said during an interview with Fox News that just stuck out to me. And you've argued so many cases before the Supreme Court. You've been in that room more than most people. He basically seemed to suggest that the Supreme Court can be relied on to save Trump, like he has them in his pot, or you could hear that. What was your reaction to hearing him talk about the Supreme Court like that? It's a different branch of government.
Yeah, the clip you just played showed the speaker saying he knows some of the justices personally and knows that many of them are concerned. I have no idea, Jen, how he would know that. I mean, I know the justices personally, too. I have no stinking idea of what they might be thinking about this. And, Trump has been, I think it's important to point out, a dead loser in the Supreme Court. every time that it comes up. I mean, 8-1 on executive privilege with only Justice Thomas siding with him in the 2020 election, rebuked lots of times. And here, there is no, I don't think that the United States Supreme Court sits to review state convictions generally. So, maybe they'll find some federal issue here and maybe there will be an appeal that will get there. But I think it's tough. And it's tough here, particularly because, Jen, the jury unanimously found Trump guilty, and not just of one count, but of 34 separate criminal convictions that are felonies. And they did so under the legal standard that is the hardest to prove for prosecutors, for government officials to prove in the system, beyond a reasonable doubt. They did it unanimously with all 12. They ran the table as they had to do in our system. Very, very hard to overturn that. Very hard to see the United States Supreme Court getting involved, despite what Speaker Johnson is insinuating.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification or helping people understand that. It just has stuck out to me since he said it. So let's talk about what happens next and the path forward. And Andrew, you have made this point, but since then Trump has made said even more attacks on people participating in the process. That some of the things he's been saying is violations of the gag order, attacking people involved in the process, will weigh on the judge during sentencing. That's coming up July 11th, which is a bit of a time from here. Talk to me about how you anticipate the impact will be and what you thought of kind of what he said on Friday and how the judge would be hearing that.
Well, two of the things that the judge, among many things that the judge will be considering, is the lack of remorse and the risk of recidivism. And first on lack of remorse, I mean, it's hard to think of a case that shows more lack of remorse. I mean, this is somebody who's prideful over what happened. And he's not only showing lack of remorse for himself, but he's sort of fomenting across the nation a disrespect for law completely. So, I mean, this is undermining of our system. Also, on recidivism, it is important to remember what the jury found here was that the 34 felonies that Neil referred to happened in 2017 in the Oval Office, 34 times. That is where the crime occurred. And what was the crime? It's the falsifying of business records to cover up a scheme to interfere with the 2016 election. And that scheme was hatched before the election, and it's carried out in the Oval Office. That was found beyond a reasonable doubt by this jury. You cannot think of a felony that goes more to the heart of our criminal justice system. And so those issues will be ones that are really weighing on the judge. And obviously, the rhetoric that it continues from Donald Trump with respect to judges, jurors, witnesses, their family members, all of that obviously is something that a judge will consider. So he's doing himself no favors in terms of himself and obviously in terms of his responsibility to the country. To me, it is reminiscent of what he was doing and led to on January 6th, where he could sit in the Oval Office while people were attacking his own vice presidents and threatening the vice president's life.
There are many things reminding me of those times as well, which is quite alarming to everyone, or should be. Andrew Weissmann and Neil Katyal, thank you both, as always, for taking the time to join me this afternoon.